group of grade 6 students decided to research the history of St. Vital to see how it had changed over the last century. We had the good fortune to interview Yude Henteleff. He was born in 1927 and lived on St. Mary's Road, on the farm where his grandparents had begun clearing the land 5 years earlier.
The rich soil along the Red River was suited to growing vegetables. In their market garden, Yude's parents grew tomatoes and cucumbers, which they sold right away, as well as root crops: onions, potatoes, carrots, parsnips, beets, cauliflower, and cabbage. His father experimented with eggplant and peppers, vegetables that were new to Manitoba.
So we literally lived off the land.
Along with horses, they also had cows and chickens. Everyone in the family had to work hard to make the farm succeed. When he was only 10 years old, Yude worked as hard as any adult, from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. They had electricity early on, but he worked hauling water, chopping wood for the stove, cutting weeds, and harvesting crops.
Through hard work, the family finally saved enough money to buy a tractor.
Oh, that was a very, very important occasion. I think it was about 1943 or 44, 45.
Yude learned to drive it.
The farmers in the area helped each other out. There were Métis, Ukrainian, Irish, Scottish, and Belgian farmers. They got together to cut ice in the winter to keep food from spoiling.
Families were poor, so they made their own entertainment. In the winter, people cleared snow on the river to make paths on the ice. They hung kerosene lanterns on poles to light the way for skaters. They had big parties together full of food and conversation.
All the neighbors would get together and we'd have a big gathering of everybody working together to cut ice from the river. And there were great big huge ice saws, and the horses would go right under the ice, and then all the older men would carve up the ice into blocks. The blocks would be about 2 feet wide and about 3 feet, 4 feet long, and about 2 or 3 feet deep. We built an ice house by digging a hole in the ground about 3 or 4 feet, and then putting up posts, double posts, and in between the posts we put in sawdust for insulation, and then a wooden roof, and we planted sod, grass, on top of the roof so that it acted as insulation. And then we'd haul up the blocks of ice from the river, and put a row of ice, put a row of sawdust, put a row of ice, put a row of sawdust. And that ice would last right through till the fall, the following year. Well, St. Vital was sort of a town of itself. It was a municipality. It had its own council and its own mayor, and it ran its own affairs as a municipality, ran its own schools and the like. So you could call St. Vital then a town. And there was a streetcar that came from Winnipeg, but it stopped about 2 miles from where our farm is. And then there was a little bus that you could take to go from what we call the end of the streetcar line up all the way up through to approximately where St. Jude's School was then. So it was really a wonderful community living.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for excellent questions.
Good morning, Mr. Henteleff. May I ask you a few questions about schools?
Absolutely.
You attended St. Germain's School. What year did you begin, and how old were you when you began?
I would be 6 years of age, and that would be 1933.
What can you tell me about school at the time?
It was one room with all 8 grades in one room. You can imagine how difficult that would be for the teacher teaching 8 different grades. But she also co-opted the older students, and often used the older students to assist her in teaching the younger ones. So it was a shared effort. The school was heated by a small little stove, and so if you sat too close, you roasted, and if you sat too far away, you were very cold. The boys' responsibility would be to cut the wood and make sure that there was lots of wood there for the fire, for the little stove to burn. There wasn't an indoor bathroom. There was an outdoor bathroom, one for the boys and one for the girls. You can imagine how comfortable that would be going out to the outdoor bathroom when it was 40 below zero. It wasn't very comfortable. There was an outside pump as well, and for water, we would bring water in with a pail. Well, St. Germain's School, there was very little opportunity for the teacher to do anything except to try and look after 8 different grades. And you can imagine how difficult that was. You had to know the study program for 8 different grades. So there was very little time for anything other than school. There was no extracurricular activities at all, except what we did at recess or over the lunchtime or sometimes after 4. But most children had to go home right after 4 because they all had chores to do. Most of them were living on farms, and we all worked. We had to work. We were part of the workforce of the farm.
Thank you, Mr. Henteleff.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure meeting you.
And a pleasure meeting you as well.
Hello, Mr. Henteleff. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the flood of 1950.
Sure, be delighted to answer.
So, in 1950, the city of Winnipeg experienced a flood that was not expected. Can you tell us what happened when the flood started and how it affected your farm and your family?
It was particularly tragic because for many, many years, from the time I could remember, we lived in this small little house, without running water, without a bathroom, and not that it was unusual for me because that's how most people lived. So it didn't bother me. But my mother always dreamed of a new house, and finally in 1949, my father had saved enough money to build a new house, and there was a dream house for my mother with a nice large kitchen and bathroom and running water and all the wonderful things that a new house brought. 1 year later, the flood happened. And so it was particularly tragic for her. It was very difficult. We saw the water rising and rising and rising, and we actually built a dike around our house. I got the help of I was still attending the factory law at that time, and I think just about the whole factory came out and helped us build that dike. But then, as we saw the flood rising, it began to sweep away buildings and cover machinery, and it literally destroyed everything. And the water came right up to the dike. By that time, my mother and my sister had left for Winnipeg already, and we were totally surrounded by a lake. Our house was built up a little bit so that the Army came along, and they said that they wanted to use our house as headquarters. So just my father, myself, and all these Army and Navy people helping people in the area. The terribly sad moment came when the flood director came along and said he thought it would be a very good idea if we open up the dike and let the water into the house, because he was very afraid that the pressure of the water would crumble the foundation. So I remember so well, my father and I opened up the dike and smashed the windows in the basement and let the water pour into the house. Choice to have their houses destroyed or have mounds built up and put their houses on top of mounds. And when you go to St. Hotel, in the flood zone, you can steal those houses, which are sort of located up in little pyramids of soil. But we didn't have to do that. We were high enough.
Well, thank you, Mr. Henteleff, for doing this interview with me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your questions.
Hello, Mr. Henteleff. My name is Jordan, and may I ask you about the modern times?
Yes, absolutely.
We understand how St. Vital began to expand after World War II. Can you tell us what the changes that were made?
Well, the changes were huge. It all started with the establishment of the St. Vital Center, which gave a huge impetus to development in St. Vital. And there was literally an explosion of development. And you see all the results of that explosion. If you drive down now St. Mary's Road, all from Bishop Grand and all the way to the perimeter, you'll see it's all developed. There's a odd little place here or there that's not, but it's pretty well filled up. And in 1967, the city of Winnipeg decided to expropriate, which means take away, all of the market garden lands all along the river. And they grew trees there to be transplanted all through the city of Winnipeg, which was fine, you know, it was a good use. But then in 1991 or 92, the then mayor of Winnipeg, Bill Norrie, who was very, very kind, recognized the major contribution that my parents had made to the market garden business, and they named it the Henteleff Tree Nursery, operated by the city of Winnipeg. Then later on, about 1997, 1998, I became aware of the fact that the city of Winnipeg was going to sell that land for commercial purpose of development. Well, that, of course, was totally at odds with what they'd originally taken the land for. So some of us got together and we called ourselves the Friends of Henteleff, and we fought the city of Winnipeg for 6 years and finally persuaded them to make it a city park. In 2002 it became a city park. It's called Henteleff Park. It's 40 acres. Since that time, volunteers, that we have a tree planting, volunteer tree planting twice a year, have planted over 5,000 trees and shrubs. We've developed over 4 kilometers of trails. We've got benches. We've got money to rehabilitate the creek that goes through. And we're still working at it. Right now, we're raising funds to build an interpretive center on the park. And that interpretive center will deal with themes such as the particular nature of river bottom land, the history of the Métis people area, the whole history of the evolution of market gardening area, and then the whole history of ourselves, not only as market gardeners, but the only Jewish family in all of Manitoba that did that work. But
You had a long, successful career. Do you think growing up on a farm helped you?
oh, I think so, very much. I had to assume a lot of responsibility at the time I was a very young person. I was treated respectfully by my parents and by co-workers. I learned a lot of techniques in terms of how to run a farm operation. And so all of that was very, very useful for me. But also, there was a great community spirit. We used to have barn dances. We had these skating parties that I spoke of earlier. We learned how to work cooperatively and together as partners. And young people were respected for their contribution to the farm economy. So yes, for me, living and coming and being brought up in the farm was a very important factor of how I've lived my life.
Thank you, Mr. Henteleff, for this interview.
And thank you so much. It's very nice meeting you.
You too. Patel Center.
As you can see, it is busy here all day long.
Until the 1950s and 60s, there were farms and open lands out here.
But the city grew, and in 1979, St. Patel Center opened.